Good? On both? Good morning. We begin this morning, Kiddushin Daf Chaf Aleph. We begin by thanking all our sponsors. We thank the sponsors for all the shiurim of the month of Elul, Jerry and Sarah Wolaski in the schus for Refuah Shalema for Zachariah Dov ben Parol Shirish Refuah Shalema. We also thank the Tilson and Woll families of Eretz Yisrael for sponsoring all the shiurim, as well as Shandi and Avram Kelman for sponsoring all the shiurim in memory of their beloved parents and the schus of all those who need Refuah Shalema. We also thank Selma Wolf for sponsoring the shiurim and the schus for Refuah Shalema for her daughters, Susan Rothberg, Tzivia Dvar Basara, and Yomi Amsterdam, Yomi C. Basara. They should both have a Refuah Shalema. I apologize that I lost half of my voice, but Mirz Hashem, we'll be able to get through it. I don't know if you noticed, I posted on the group a chart. It's not because today's Amud is ever so complicated. There are copies of the chart on the front table over here that might be helpful. It's just because we are constantly going to be going back and forth between selling a stei achuza and being makdish a stei achuza, which means a person consecrates his stei achuza, he gives it to hektish, and selling bati arechoma. It's important that it's not very complicated, it's not very detailed, but sometimes when you go back and forth between the three of them, you start to get confused about which one are we talking about. So I just figured if I just make this chart with the four main categories that we're dealing with, which are, can it be redeemed immediately during the first 2 years? Does it go back to its original owner at Yovel? And the third column is, may it be redeemed partially? We refer to that as lo v'goel chatzayin. It's the two ideas. Can he borrow money and then redeem it? And can he then redeem it partially? And the last category that we put in over here is, may one redeem it after year one? Now, I wrote after year 1 or 2 because clearly when it comes to mocher stei achuza, if we wrote there's an X in the box that he can't redeem it during the first 2 years, so then for that it's going to have to be after year 2, so that's why there's a 2 in parentheses. But those are the 4 categories we're going to be dealing with. Let's just review the basic idea that we introduced yesterday and how we're using this. When it came to Rav Shimon, so step 1 is we have a pasuk which tells us the halacha. Now we're trying to figure out why you need the pasuk. Why can't this be figured out from a logical inference? Why can't we just look at different cases and make comparisons and learn the ultimate halacha from there? Now, the logic that we introduced yesterday was that if a person will ultimately get their field back by Yovel, in other words, if the person doesn't have much to worry about in terms of ultimately getting his field back at a later date, then we don't have to work so hard to give this person opportunities to redeem it earlier. Whereas, if a person's going to lose their field, if they don't redeem it within a specific time frame, then we want to give the person the ability during that time frame to be able to redeem it, even if he hasn't earned enough money to actually buy back the real estate. And that's why, if you'll look in columns number 2, I guess 2 and 3, either way you go, from whichever side you go, you'll see that when it comes to a mocher stei achuza, it goes back at Yovel, and therefore it would be logical to say that he may not redeem it partially, because we don't need to extend courtesies to this person to allow him to redeem the field partially, because what's the worst thing that'll happen? He can't redeem it, big deal. When Yovel comes, it will come back to him anyway. When it comes to makdish stei achuza, it does, for a person who consecrates, he sanctifies his stei achuza. In such a case, if Yovel comes and he had not had the opportunity to redeem it, it goes to the Kohanim. He doesn't get it back. And therefore, what it would be logical to say that we extend courtesies to him or certain leniencies, allowing him to redeem the field partially. Now, I wrote over there, that box, conclusion of the Gemara is that I would think otherwise is not for the Pasuk, and that's what we're going to learn today, because there's also, what we're doing here is being Dorish time in Dekra, with a Yafa Koach and Hura Koach. We'll go through that again in the Gemara. But ultimately, there might be a Kal V'chomer, another logical inference, that would tell you to look at other cases. If you look in the next box, you see B'bati Arichoma, that it goes back, does not go back at Yovel, and still the Brisa says that it's not going to be able to be redeemed partially, and we're going to see that right now, as a matter of fact. So yesterday, we left off on Daf Chaf Amud Beis. We left off by the words Esvei. Esvei is 7 lines from the bottom. It's the first word on the line. So Esvei. Im Gaal Yigal, Melamed Shalova V'Goal V'Goal Achatzai. The pasuk says very clearly, Im Gaal Yigal. Then that teaches us that he's allowed to go ahead and be Love V'Goal. He can borrow the money and then redeem it. In other words, it comes to say not like we would say in other cases, because in other cases it says the Siga Yado. It says very clearly in the pasuk, when it comes to a mocher stei achuza, he has to actually earn the money on his own. He can't take out a loan. He can't just take out a mortgage and then buy it back. He has to actually earn the money. So Gaal, Yigal teaches us that no, he's allowed to go ahead and borrow money, and not only that, he could do a partial redemption on the field. Shiyachal, and the Gemara explains, why do I need a pasuk for this? Shiyachal, for I would have thought, V'halo dinhu, I can apply Kal V'chomer, a logical inference, which is, Uma mocher stei achuza. If you look at mocher stei achuza, a person who sells a field of inheritance that belonged to his ancestors for many years, Shiyafa kocho. He has a strong hand when it comes to the redemption. Why? If Yovel comes, the Jubilee year comes, V'lo nigala, and he never had the opportunity to redeem it, chozeres leba'aleha beyovel. It comes back to its original owner in Yovel. And that's what we see in our chart, in the top line, that goes back at Yovel. But still, hura kocho, she'ein lova v'gol l'achatzai. He still has a weakness that when it comes to redeeming it partially, he cannot redeem it partially. He doesn't have the ability to redeem it partially. If you have all the money up front, you could buy it back. If not, not. And I would say, because if I look at that case as my model, I would go to the next line in our chart and say, Makdish, a person consecrates his te'achuz, the shahura kocho. He has a weaker hand. Why? She'ein lova v'gol achatzayin. He can't take out a mortgage to redeem it, and he can't either partially redeem it. So then that would say, if that's the case, if the makdish te'achuza is going to be so weak that he cannot, that he does not get it back at Yovel, I would say he's also weak, and he can't redeem it partially. In other words, that would be the logic in this case. In this case, the logic would not be, as we said earlier, that we're trying to find ways to be lenient on this person and allow him other courtesies how he'll get back his field. Rather, we're looking at how strong the original seller or consecrator is. If the person has ultimately the ability to be able to get the field back after or at Yovel, then I would say that he has the ability to redeem it partially as well. But if he can't get it back at Yovel, I would say, look at this guy. He's so weak. His sale is so strong, and his connection to the field is so weak, and therefore the only way he can get it back is if he actually comes up with all the cash up front and gets it back. The Gemara says that's not a good Kal V'chomer. In other words, we need the pasuk still. We need the pasuk of Im Gaal Yigal, because the Kal V'chomer would not work. Because Malamocher Stei Achuza, when you look at a person who sells a Stei Achuza, Shekin Hura Kocho Li Gael Miyad. When it comes to a person who sells a Stei Achuza, can he redeem it immediately afterwards? In other words, let's just take an example. So Rosh Chodesh Elul, and a person finds himself financially strapped. So he sells a piece of real estate, a stei achuza, a piece of real estate that's been in his family's possession for many, many years since the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Now, Baruch Hashem, throughout the month of Elul, he was very successful in business, and he says, I want that field back. Can he now go ahead and buy that field back? The answer is no. He can't buy it back in Elul, not in Elul of this year, not in Elul of next year. He has to wait 2 years in order to be able to redeem it. So you see that he has a weakness when it comes to redeeming the field. So the Gemara says, maybe that's the reason why he can't redeem it partially, because he has a weakness. Very good, he gets it back at Yovel, but he also possesses weakness, which is the box all the way to the left and the top line, which is he cannot redeem it during the first 2 years. Tomer b'makdish. Let's go to the next line in our chart, which is a makdish, a person who consecrates his field. Sheyafa kochel ligoel miyad. He actually has the strength to be able to redeem it right away. He goes ahead and he's makdish it, and he says, you know what a mistake, I need this back. He can right now go right back to the Gizbar, to the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash, and say, I'd like to buy it back. And he could do that right away. So maybe that will not, maybe the fact that there's a strength of going back at Yovel is going to be canceled out by the weakness that he can't redeem it right away, and the fact that Mochas De'achuzah has a weakness that it doesn't go back at Yovel, but it has a strength that you can redeem it right away, and therefore that will not be able to teach us what the halach is going to be with regard to partial redemption. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. If that's how you're going to try to prove your case, then let's go to the third line in our chart, which is Mocher Bayis Bati Arichoma Yochiach. Let's look at a person who sells his home in a walled city from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Let that be our proof. Sheyafa Kocha Ligal Miad. He has the ability to redeem it right away. However, Ve'ein Lova, Ve'goel Achatzayin. He cannot borrow and redeem the field. He can either redeem it halfway. So now, what the whole point in bringing this brisa in here was for this last line. Because the last line says that when it comes to a home sold in a walled city, it says very clearly in this brisa over here, in lo v'gal, you can't borrow and redeem it, v'gal achatzayin. You can't redeem it halfway, which is the last line in our chart, and that's why we have, when it says brisa, the brisa clearly says, no, you cannot redeem it partially. However, earlier on our page, from yesterday's Gemara, we had a Rav Sheshes who told us that you can go ahead and redeem a home sold in Bati Arachoma partially. So that's the Gemara's question at this point in time. Rav Sheshes, you told us when it comes to Bati Arachoma, a home sold in a walled city from the time of Yeshua ben Nun, that you can redeem that field partially. The problem is the brisa that we just learned actually says the opposite. So that's why when we have our chart, it says Rav Sheshes yes and brisa no. But that's ultimately a question on Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes, how can you tell us that he can redeem it partially? The brisa explicitly says that he cannot. How does the Gemara deal with this? The Gemara says, Lo Kasha, which brings us to the top of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, Ha Rabbanan, Ha Rabbi Shimon. This is the difference between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon. What does this mean? If you remember yesterday, and we explained this morning also, Rav Shimon is Darish Time and Dekra. So Rav Shimon is the one who tells us, if we understand the reasoning of the pasuk, then we can apply it to other cases. Rav Shimon was of the opinion that if a field goes back at Yovel, in other words, if it goes back to the original owner at Yovel, we don't extend any further courtesies to the person. We don't allow him to redeem it partially, because he'll get it back at Yovel. And that's why he says when it comes to Bati Arichoma, it does not go back at Yovel. If you don't redeem it after year one, the pasuk says it's lachalutin. It's an absolute sale. It's done. It's muchlat. You can't get it back. Therefore, Rav Sheshes applies Rav Shimon's logic over there and says, if that's the case, we'll extend the courtesy to him. Like this, he could redeem the field in installments. Like this, he'll be able to get it back and not lose it forever. Whereas when it comes to the Brisa was following the opinion of the Rabbanan, who are going to make a Kal V'chomer. And therefore, if it goes back at Yovel, it shows that you have more strength. If you have more strength, you have the ability to redeem it partially. And therefore, when it comes to Bati Arichoma, since it does not go back at Yovel, you will not be able to redeem it partially. The Gemara continues. Tani Chada, we learned in one Brisa, Lova V'goel Lachatzayim. We once learned, with regard to a person who sells a home in a walled city, that he can go ahead and borrow to redeem it, and he could redeem it partially. V'tani idach, We learned in another brisa, the person can't borrow to redeem it or to redeem it partially. So we have a stira. The Gemara says, Lo kasha, this is not a problem. Again, the same idea. Ha Rabbanan, ha Rabbi Shimon. Depends if you're following the opinion of the Rabbanan, we're going to make this kal v'chomer, or are you going to follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon and use it as a logical comparison, or I should say, not that logical comparison, but he's dorish time in the kra, and therefore he says, I can understand why a field would be able to be redeemed. Partially, that's because the guy ultimately might lose it, whereas the chachama make the kal v'chomer. The Gemara says, Simin, Cheresh, Chavash, Zman, which is a way to remember the names of the Manda Amrim in the upcoming Gemara. The Gemara says the following, Amar Vacha Breid Rava Rav Ashi. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, Ika lemifrach, we could ask a pircha, in other words, a refutation of Ma'ala Mochar Bayis Bati Arichoma, Sheken Hura Kocha Ligo La'olam. Again, going back to the Kal V'chomer, this is why the Gemara is a little bit hard to hold your head together with, because there's four concepts over here that we're going to be dealing with back and forth to try to figure out, is the person who sold it the one who has the upper hand or the lower hand? And we have to take all these variables into account. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, the problem when it comes to a home sold in about the Arichoma, he has a weakness because he doesn't have the ability to be able to redeem it forever. He's got 1 year. Either he gets it done within the year or not. Tomer b'makdish, when it comes to a person who consecrates his field, shiyafa kochel gol olam, he has the ability to redeem it forever. Now, it doesn't mean forever. It means until Yovel, but often we find the word la'olam refers to olamo shel Yovel, to the end of the Yovel period. So Amar Rav Acha Saba Rav Ashi. Rav Acha Saba told Rav Ashi, Mishum de'ika lemeimar nehadar dina. And this is ultimately where the Gemara comes back to figure this all out, and to put everything together. We're going to do something called a mahatzad. When we have too many variables in a case, you're trying to make a kal v'chomer. Kal v'chomer is a logical inference. And you look at two different cases and you say, which one is more chomer, which one is more strict, which one is more difficult, which one is more kal, which one is more lenient. And if you find a din in one, you find a particular halacha when it comes to a case which is more lenient, so then often you could apply it or not apply it to the case which is more strict. In other words, just using simple logic, you could apply halachos from one case to the next. However, when there are too many variables, then you can't just look at one particular piece of information. It's like confounding data when you look at a research project. You can look at one piece of information, but you have to take everything into account. The Gemara ultimately says, what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to make what's called a mahatzad, where we find the common denominator. Yes, every case is going to be a little bit different, and every case is going to have its particular set of halachas. But ultimately, what is the commonality between these cases? And that's what the Gemara is going to try to find over here. Let's go back to Amar Vacha Sabal Rav Ashi Mishum Nikol Meimar Nehadra Dina. We could say that you go back and forth, and therefore Teisi b'Mahatzad. Let's learn everything out from a Mahatzad, which means what is the Tzad Hashava? What is the common denominator? Mocher Steachuza. When a person comes to sell a field which has been in his family for many years, Yochiach Sheyafa Kocha Ligol Olam. When it comes to a field that he was owned by his family for many years, he can redeem it forever. But still, he can't borrow in order to pay back, in order to redeem it, and he can't redeem it partially. And then, so you'll say, hold on a second, there's a weakness over there. He can't redeem it right away. The Gemara says, if that's the case, if that's where you're getting stuck, a person who sells a home in a walled city, that will prove that it makes no difference, because in such a case, you can redeem it right away. The Gemara says, you'll go back and forth, and you're going to say, lo re'izeh k're'izeh. They're not similar. Every case is going to be a little bit different. And therefore, what's the bottom line? Hatzad hashava shebehem. What is the common denominator that they all share, which is shenigalin? They are fields that after they're sold have the ability to be redeemed, which that is a chiddush. That is something which is a novelty. The fact that you sell something, have the ability to be able to buy it back within a particular time frame, shows that there is some limitations on the sale. So therefore, all these cases are pieces of real estate that can be sold, but ultimately they can be redeemed. However, the ein lova, the goel lachatzayin. I can't borrow to redeem it, and I can't redeem it partially. Therefore, I'm going to say af ani avi. Therefore, I would say the same thing is true. Maktish. I would say, my logic would tell me that maktish, when a person consecrates his field and gives it to hektish, shenigal. Yes, I have the ability to be able to redeem it. And I would say, ve'ein lova v'goel lechatzayin. I would say, therefore, I can't borrow to redeem it, and I can't redeem it halfway. The missing line in the Gemara is, and that's the reason why we have a pasuk which says, ve'im ga'ol yig'al, that double lashon, the redundancy in the pasuk tells you that although I would have used this logical inference to teach me that I can't go ahead and borrow to redeem it, or I can't redeem it partially, the pasuk teaches me when it comes to makdish de'achuza that yes, you can. And that's why in our chart there's a check in the box by makdish de'achuza that says may redeem partially, because the conclusion of our Gemara is that I would think otherwise if not for the pasuk. Why would I think otherwise if not for the pasuk? Because I would say, let me make this mahatzad. Let me look at the common denominator. I would say there are other cases where the halakha is I can be goel, I can redeem my field. And those other cases, there are limitations on my ability to be able to redeem it, which is I can't borrow money and I can't do it partially. I would have drawn that conclusion as well by makdish de'achuza. Therefore, on our previous amud, we have a pasuk which tells us v'im ga'al yig'al, that no, when a person consecrates his field, it's different, and he can indeed borrow money to redeem it, and he can indeed redeem it halfway. That takes us to the first half of today's Gemara. The Gemara continues. Amar Marzutra Brei to Rav Mari l'Ravina. Marzutra Brei to Rav Mari, the son of Rav Mari, told Ravina, Ikel Mifrach. I could have asked that the tzad hashava is no good. The commonality is not the same. Why? Ma'ala tzad hashavash behen. I would say that the tzad hashava is no good. In other words, they're not common. The information is not the same. Why? Shekain hura kocham the gal b'shana shnia. Those are both cases that you can redeem it in the second year. Tomer b'makdish shiafa koch the gal b'shana shnia. You can, when it comes to makdish, you can redeem things post the second year. Amar le Ravina from the Meimar. If that's your problem, that you're going to point out that when it comes to Bati Arachoma, you can't redeem it after the second year, then I'll just add one more case to the mix, which is going to show you that it doesn't make a difference. Because Eved Ivri Animkar Le'Oved Kachav Yochiach. Add one more line to our chart. I didn't do this because I didn't want it to be more complicated. But ultimately, you could add it on by yourself. Eved Ivri, a Jewish servant who sold to a non-Jewish family, it's Yafa Kocho, the Gal B'Shana Shnia. He can be redeemed during the first year, second year, third year, fourth year, whatever it is. The Ein Lov of a Gal Chatzayin, and you still can't borrow to redeem him, and you cannot redeem him halfway, and therefore I would be able to say that when it comes to Makdash Te'achuza, to a person who consecrates his Te'achuza, that I would say that the halach would be the same, that he can't borrow, and he can't borrow to redeem it, and he can't redeem it halfway. That's why we have to have that pasuk. Ba'aminei Rav Huna bar Chinana merav Sheshes. Huna bar Chinana asked the following question to Rav Sheshes: Hamocher bayis b'bati arichoma nigal akrovim o ein nigal akrovim. Now that we just got finished figuring out whether or not you can partially redeem it, we're on to the next set of details. Is it something that relatives, in other words, not just the one who sold it, but relatives of the seller can, or perhaps maybe must, go ahead and redeem it. So what's the halach when we're dealing with a mocher bayis bati arechoma, a person who sells a home in bati arechoma, in the walled city? What's the halacha with regard to relatives? Can they go ahead and redeem it? And the Gemara explains the question. Geulasa misteachuza kamar. Do we learn geula making like we explained yesterday, it's a Gzeira Shava, but it's not a full-fledged Gzeira Shava. Generally, Gzeira Shava is when you find a word by one halacha and exactly the same word by another halacha, that indicates that you draw a parallel between the two cases. So this is not a real full Gzeira Shava because, as we learned, Gzeira Shavas are irrefutable. You can't make a Gzeira Shava and just bring some of the halachas. But it's much more of a comparison, like a Giloy Das, like a revelation that they're very much the same. So would we say Geulasu Mistei Achuza Gamar? Would we say you learn it from Mistei Achuza? And then I would say Mastei Achuza Eino Nigelis Lechatzayin V'Nigelis Lekrovim. When it comes to a Mistei Achuza, it can't be partially redeemed, but relatives can redeem it. So I would say Af Hainami, the same thing is true when it comes to selling a home in a walled city. Ein Nigel Lechatzayin V'Nigel Lekrovim. You can't go ahead and redeem it partially. V'Nigel Lekrovim, and you can have relatives go ahead and redeem it. Odoma, or maybe I would say Ki Ksiva Geula B'Chatzayin. When Geula was written, it was just talking about redeeming it halfway. However, it wasn't talking about Bekrovim Loksiv. It was not referring to Krovim. So Amar Le Eina Nigal. It is not going to be redeemed by relatives. Okay, the Gemara says, if that's the case, that's your halach, you're telling me it can't be redeemed by relatives, let's look around. Esvei. I'm going to ask you a question. It says in the pasuk, B'chal geula titnu. With all geula it shall be given. Now the truth is the pasuk doesn't say this anywhere. The pasuk actually, if you have the Oz V'Hadar Gemara or maybe the Art Scroll Gemaras, you have the pasuk on the side. The pasuk actually says, Uv'chal eretz achuzaschem geula titnu la'aretz. The Gemara just abbreviated the pasuk. And the point over there is that it says b'chal. B'chal is an inclusive term. It means with all. L'rabos batim ve'eved ivri. That includes a home, that there could be a geula, there could be a redemption for a home and for eved ivri. So mailav, the Gemara says, isn't this referring to bati arachoma when it says batim, that you could redeem we could redeem a home with relatives? Isn't that referring to a bias, a bati arachoma, a home that was sold within a walled city? The Gemara says, no, that's not what it's talking about. Lo, it's talking about bati chatzerim, homes within the courtyard that are not in the walled city. The Gemara says, oh really? You're telling me that the pasuk there is telling you that relatives can go ahead and buy back a field that was not within a walled city? Bati chatzerim behediksiv. We have an explicit pasuk which tells us the halacha with regard to those homes. It says, I'll stay ha'aretz yichashiv. The pasuk says very clearly with regard to those fields that it can be redeemed. Gemara says no. That is not telling you that it has the right to go ahead and redeem it. Hahu lekov o chova. That is giving you the obligation. It's giving the mandate that they have to redeem it. V'alibed Rabbi Eliezer. That is referring to we're following the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. Who is Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanya, for it says in the Brisa, the Gaal is mimkar achiv. When a person will say, the pasuk says very clearly, that a person could go ahead and redeem the sale of his brother. The Gemara says, okay, rishus, is it just that he has the ability? So ata omer rishus o ene elachova. When it says a person could go ahead and redeem the sale of his brother, is that actually saying he has permission to do it, or that he must go ahead and do it? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, "V'ish ki lo yelo goel." The pasuk continues and says, if there's a person who does not have anybody who can redeem it from him. Now, what we're going to learn is from how the Gemara goes on to explain this, which is, hold on, are there any Jewish people who don't have any goelim? They have no relatives at all? Such a person generally doesn't exist, unless we're talking about a convert. So a convert might not actually have relatives, because the halacha is that they're considered kekatan shnei adami. But generally speaking, everyone's going to have some relative someplace. Ela, the Gemara says, what does it mean? Ke'ein lo goel. It means elazeh sheyesh lo. It refers to a person who has relatives, but his relatives say to him, "Ve'ein rotza likach. I don't want to buy your stuff back." Sharashus biyado. That he has the ability to say no. Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. However, Rabbi Eliezer, who we are going with over here, Eliezer Omer v'go'al es bimkar achiv chova. It actually teaches us that he has the obligation to go ahead and redeem his relative sales. You're telling me it's a chova, maybe it's not actually an obligation, maybe it's just permission, it allows him to do it. The pasuk of U'chol eretz achuzastim geula titnu la'aretz, that pasuk of Bechal, Hakasav Kovo, Chova, the pasuk repeats it and tells us Bechal that he actually must redeem his relatives' fields. Amile Rabbanan Ravashi. The Gemara continues. Rabbanan said to Ravashi, Amile Ravina Ravashi. Some say it was not the Rabbanan, rather it was Ravina who said to Ravashi, Bishlam Ulaman Amar L'Rabos, but the Arichoma, very good. Everything works out well if we are including that relatives can go ahead and redeem the field, the home that was sold in a walled city. In other words, if you're telling me that the pasuk was coming to include that relatives can redeem a home which was sold in a walled city, that's why it says bechal, because it's including that relatives can go ahead and redeem a home that was sold within a walled city. According to the one who says it's not referring to homes sold in a walled city, but rather homes in the courtyards, my bechal. Why does the word say bechal? It's an inclusive term for no reason. The Gemara says kasha. Kasha, as we always point out, kasha does not mean that it's a refutation. It means it's a very good kasha. It means that there's an answer someplace. The Gemara doesn't always tell us why it doesn't give us the answer. The Gemara doesn't tell us what the answer is. Often the Rishonim spend time trying to figure out what the answer would be, but the Gemara ends off saying it's a very good question, but we're not going to answer it, but it's not a refutation, and therefore we can still keep alive the opinion that says it's coming to include that relatives can redeem homes sold in a walled city. The Gemara continues, Es v'Abaya. Abaya asks the following question: Ma tamun leimar yigolenu, 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 gimel pa'amim. If you go through the parsha, in Parshas B'chukosai, then it says yigolenu 3 times. L'rabos, it comes to include kol ha'geulos shenigalos keseder hazeh. It says it includes all the geulos that it is going to be redeemed like this. What does Keseder Hazeh mean? What's like this? Rashi tells us it means that relatives can go ahead and redeem it. So my love, let's just assume if it's including everything, but the Arichoma, the Eved Ivri. That's coming to say that when a person sells a home in a walled city, that his relatives can go ahead and redeem it. Where it says, no, that's not what it's talking about. Lo batich, that's misteachus. It's referring to homes in the chatzer, in the courtyard, and steachusa. Gemara says, really? Batich chatzerim steachusa behediksiv. Those are written clearly. It's explicit pasuk which tells us that they can be redeemed by relatives. It says, al steyar tzichashiv. The Gemara says, "Kadam Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak lekarov karov kodem." Those psukim are actually teaching me that the relatives can go ahead and redeem it. Rather, it's teaching us by steachuza. When it comes to a steachuza, which again is a field which belonged to his family, in those cases it says very clearly, the pasuk is actually clear exactly how it works. It says "Ba'galu akarev elav," and it says. It says Echav first, and then it says Ododo, O Ben Dodo Yigalenu. So first it says Echav, which is his brother, which is the closest relative. Echad me Echav Yigalenu. The pasuk says Echad me Echav Yigalenu. One of his brothers should go ahead and redeem it. And then it says Ododo, or his uncle, O Ben Dodo, or his cousin. So you see the progression goes from his brother to his uncle to his cousin. The pasuk is teaching us that first the order should be that first the closest relatives should go ahead and redeem it, and then as we start going down the line and exhausting our options, we start going to more distant relatives. Hachanami l'karov karov kodem is teaching us the order of redemption. Gemara says, interesting. Where did this come from? Where did this line from Nachman Yitzchak come from? Where did he teach us this idea that you go in order of relationship? Heicha itmer Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Where did Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak teach us to go in order of the relationship? Aha, the Gemara says this is where we learned it. A question was asked. Eved Ivri, Hanimkar li Yisrael. If a Jewish servant is sold to a Jewish master, Nigal Krovim, O Eina Nigal Krovim. Can relatives go ahead and redeem him, or not? The Gemara says, according to Rabbi, it's not even a question. Why? Amar, he says, Mi she'ena nigal ba'ela, a person who can't be redeemed by relatives, nigal b'sheish, is redeemed, is not really redeemed, but goes out after 6 years, which clearly indicates that if he goes out after 6 years, then he doesn't have the ability to be able to be redeemed by his relatives. So that means an Eved Ivri does not get redeemed by relatives. Alma, lo mifrak, according to Rabbi, clearly does not get redeemed by relatives. Kiti bailach, where are we asking the question? According to whom is the question relevant? According to the opinion of the Rabbanan. Mai, what's the halacha? Yalfinan sacher sacher. Do we learn the words of sacher sacher? V'lo darshi yigalenu, o dilma yigalenu lezeh v'lo la'acher. So do we make this drasha or not? Gemara says Tashma. Let's try to bring a raya. B'chol geula titnu. Pasuk says B'chol eretz achuzasim geula titnu l'rabos batim ve'eved ivri. It includes homes and a Jewish servant. My love. Wouldn't we say that's telling us Bati Arechoma, homes in a walled city, ve'eved ivri nimkal Yisrael, and a Jewish servant sold to a Jewish master? The Gemara says no. That's not what it teaches us. Rather, Eved Ivri Animkal Kachav. It's referring to a Jewish servant who is sold to a non-Jewish master. Gemara says, really? Eved Ivri Animkal Kachav Mediksiv. We don't need this pasuk to teach us that. That's actually explicitly clear in the pasuk. It says, O Dodo, O Ben Dodo Yigalenu. Turning to Chaf Aleph on the base, where it says, no, Hahu Ulakova Chova. That is actually teaching us the obligation. The obligation is different than the ability to be able to do it. I feel Rabbi Yeshua, and even according to Rabbi Yeshua. If you look at Rashi, who is this Rabbi Yeshua? Rashi, the second line says, the Amar Gabestei Achuza Rishos, and he says when it comes to redeeming a field which was sold, it's a Rishos. He has permission to do it. Hacha, in this case, Rashi says, second line, Moda de Chova lo yitma ba'oed gechaven. When a Jewish servant is sold to a non-Jewish master, it's an obligation upon his family members to get him out. Why? We don't want a person being raised in a society of the idolaters. So the Gemara tries to go ahead and prove it. Tashema. Let's try to bring a raya. Ma tam alamer yigalenu gimel pamim. But why does it say yigalenu 3 times? L'rabba is kol ha'geulas shenigalos kaseder hazeh. To include all geulas that they can be redeemed by relatives. Ma'alav bati arachom v'eved ivri animkal liYisrael. Isn't that coming to include a home sold in a walled city and a Jewish servant sold to a Jew? Gemara says lo. Rather, it's not true. Bati chatzerim. It's referring to bati chatzerim, homes not in a walled city, ustei achuza, and fields that belong to his ancestors for many years. Gemara says, hold on, bati chatzerim b'hediksiv b'hu. That's already written very clearly. We went through this already. Nachman, the Karov, Kodem. So yes, we actually have a raya that goes in order of family relationship. And now we have concluded all the back and forth between Stei Achuza, Makdash Stei Achuza, Mocher Stei Achuza, Bati Archoma, Bati Chatzerim, Eved Ivri Animkal Yisrael, Eved Ivri Animkal Kachavim. And we are going to go back to our Mishnah and analyze the case of piercing a hole in the ear of the Eved Ivri, which it seems to be much more exciting. Let's go. V'nirtza nikna beritzia. What is a nirtza? So nirtza is the end of the Pesach Seder, and it seems like we might be there right now. But that's not what this is referring to. This is nirtza with an ayin, which refers to an Eved Ivri after the 6 years of service, decides he wants to continue on. The halacha is he can stay there. How is his master going to acquire him? The Mishnah taught us that his master makes a hole in his ear. Nirtza nikna beritzia dechsiv. How do I know that? I'll tell you how I know that. It says very clearly, v'ratza donav es ozno b'martzeya. Very clear. No kashas, no rayas, no kavachomers, no gzera shava. It says in the pasuk very clearly, v'ratza donav es ozno b'martzeya. That's how we know that in Nirtza, an Eved Ivri wants to continue on, he is acquired by having a hole pierced into his ear. V'kona es atzma b'yovel v'misa sa'adon. How does he get himself back? When Yovel comes or when his master dies? D'chsiv. How do we know that? D'chsiv avado. and he will serve him. V'lo etzaben, v'lo etzabas. Let's just remember, when we're dealing with an Eved Ivri in the first 6 years of service, if his master dies, he doesn't go free. His children inherit the purchase of the Eved Ivri. When it comes to a Nirtza, if he's post those 6 years, then yes, he gets himself back with Yovel, or when his master dies. He does not get passed on to the child. How do we know that? The Sefer says the pasuk v'avado, he will serve him. V'lo asaben, v'lo asabas, he doesn't serve the son or the daughter. L'olam, it says the v'avado l'olam, he'll work for him forever. It doesn't mean forever, rather l'olamo shel Yovel, for the entire period of time until Yovel comes around. Tana Rabbanan. The Rabbanan taught us, Martseya, the pasuk says Martseya, Einli ella Martseya. I only know from the pasuk that he can use an awl. An awl, I guess, it's probably the best word for it. It's like basically a screwdriver that's sharp at the end, and it can be used to pierce an ear. I don't think that's how they pierce ears, but I guess there's something similar. But that's what the pasuk is referring to. Minayin rabos hasul v'asira v'hamachat v'hamekedeach. Oh, v'hamichtav. I don't know what all these things are. I'm sorry. I tried to look at Rashi. Rashi tells us the sul is a bruka. Anybody know what a bruka is? I don't. Rashi tells us a sira is a kite, that's a thorn. And mekedeach, in modern Hebrew, I think it's a drill. So I don't think they had drills back then, but I guess some type of drill. All types of handheld tools that can be used to pierce someone's ear. Tamalomer, the pasuk says, v'lokachta. You can take l'rabos kol davar shenikach b'yad, to include anything which is taken in your hand. Divri Rabbi Yehuda. These are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. So ultimately, according to the words of Rabbi Yehuda, anything, any handheld instrument that can be used to pierce the ear of the Eved is acceptable. Rabbi says, no, can't be anything. Ma martseya miyuchet shamateches. A martseya is made out of metal. Afkal shamateches. Anything you want to use to pierce the ear of this Eved Ivri who wants to stay on needs to be made out of metal. Dover acher. Others say ha martseya. There's an extra hey, lahavi hamartseya hagadol, to include the large martseya, which means it's like, I guess, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but it was a well-known martseya. Amar Belazar Yudin, Amar Rabbi Elazar Yudin Beribi Hayadoresh Kishahem Rotzen in Rotzen Elba Milsa. So Yudin Beribi, Rashi over here explains that Beribi just meant he was sharp. There are other places when Ribi actually may have been his name, but ultimately it means he was very sharp. So he said when they would make a hole, they would make a hole b'milsa in the earlobe, which means the soft part at the bottom of the ear. Chacham say, Ein Eved Ivri Nirtza, Ipnei Shenasa Balmum. Sorry, Ein Eved Kohen Nirtza. If a Kohen sold himself as an Eved, he does not become a Nirtza. Why? Because it makes a hole in his ear and turns him into a Kohen who has a blemish and can't do avoda. Now they say, hold on a second. If you're telling me to make the hole in the earlobe, that doesn't make an Eved Ivri into a Balmum. Having a pierced ear in the earlobe doesn't make doesn't make a person to a Balmum. So therefore, they conclude it must be they make the piercing in the upper cartilage of the ear, which that indeed would make him into a Balmum. But my kamifagi, what is the source of their argument? The Rabbi Darish Klali Uprati. Let's go back. The Gemara is actually going back to the original argument between Rabbi Yossi and the Chachamim about which tool can be used. So now, if we haven't had enough drashas today, we're just going to quickly bring in klal pratu klal and riboy miyat riboy, just to make things a little bit more sweet for today. But what's the difference between a klal pratu klal? Let's just quickly run through this. A klal pratu klal means when sometimes the Torah gives us a generalization that includes everything, and then the pasuk gives us a specification which limits the generalization. And then it gives us another generalization, which is a klal, a prat, and a klal. Generalization, specification, generalization. If that's the way you look at the psukim, then as long as it's similar to the prat, anything similar to the specification would be acceptable. Riboy miyut riboy is much more inclusive. It includes everything, and then it excludes something, and then it includes everything, so it only excludes one thing. So it's the same type of logic, which is first it's all-inclusive, and then it's exclusive, and then it's inclusive. The question is on your bottom line. If you're one who learns the Torah with the rule of klal pratu klal, then you'll have much more because you're gonna have less because it has to be similar. It has to be something similar to the prat. If you're going to be a riboy miyut riboy person, then it only excludes one thing. So the Gemara wants to know what is the source of the machlokas, about which tool can be used to pierce the ear. The following: the Rabbi darish klali uprati, and therefore it says v'lakachta, you shall take. Klal, take anything. Martseya, an all. Prat, the only thing you can use is an all. Be'azno ubadelas chazar v'kala. When it says be'azno ubadelas, that's much more of a generalization. So that's again going to be the klal. So therefore, klal pratu klal. You have a klal, a generalization, a prat, a specification, and a klal. So then iyata dan elak eina prat. You cannot allow anything else in unless it is similar to the specification, which is maha prat mefurish shamateches. Just like the specification was the martseya, which is made out of metal, afkol shamateches, anything else would have to be made out of metal as well. Rabbi Yossi darish riboy umiyot. He uses the logic of riboy umiyot, which is v'lakachta riba. Lakachta says take anything. Martseya miyot. It excludes something. He says no, that pasuk goes ahead and includes everything with azno and delas. Now you have the ribo miyot riba hakol. It adds everything in there. So what is the miyot coming to accomplish? My Rabbi Kalmili. What are you going to add in? Everything. My miyot. What are you going to exclude? Miyot sam. Some type of potion that can be used to, I don't know, I guess it will disintegrate the skin there or something like that. It sounds pretty painful and very uncomfortable. But some type of medicine or some type of potion that the person could place in the person's ear that would cause it to burn a hole. I guess maybe some type of acid. Amar Mar says hamartseya. When it says the pasuk of hamartseya, lavi martseya hagadol. It includes the martseya hagadol. So my mashal, what does that mean? Rava hayerech hamiyumenes, which is referring to the good anashe, it refers to the choicest yerech, choicest thigh. Hamiyumenes should be yerech. Hachanami martzeya miyuchid should be martzayim. Has to be the most special of alls. Again, go to Home Depot, see your local associate who will tell you which one is the best all to use to pierce somebody's ear. No, don't do that, please. Amar Relazar Yudin Beribi. Hayadarish. Rabbi Lazar says that Yudin Beribi would make the following darashing. Shein rotzin, when they would make the hole, when they pierce the ear, ein rotzin el b'milsa. They would pierce the ear. Where? In the earlobe. We saw this earlier. The Chachamim say, hold on, Eved Ivri cannot become a nirtza because it's going to make him into a balmum. Now, Gemara says, big deal. This is his choice. V'yasa balmum, let him become a balmum. Now, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, "Mabakach v'laritzia mitzvahu." In other words, what are we supposed to do? The guy decided to become an Eved Ivri, and he wanted to stay there. So now you have to make a hole in his ear. Amar Rabba bar Rav, Amar Rabba bar Rav Shila, Amar Kar. The pasuk says, "V'shava mishpachto." The problem just is that one of the conditions of an Eved Ivri is that he always has to have the ability to go back to his family. If he can't go back to his family as a Kohen, then that's not called going back to his family. Therefore, he can't become a Balma. Ibayilu, the more I ask the question, Eved Ivri Kohen, Ma'u Shiyim Silo Rabba Shivcha Kananis. I just should point out that just in general, a person having Eved Ivri as a Kohen is going to be very complicated because he still is a Kohen. So if he's going to have him working for him, he's still going to have to keep in mind the pasuk of the Kiddashto to treat him like a Kohen. So he's not going to be much of an Eved if he's going to hire him as an Eved Ivri, but either way. So what's the halacha with regard to his master giving him a shivcha kananis? We know that an Eved Ivri has signed up to be of service to his master, and his master can actually give him a shivcha kananis to be married to. So now what's the halacha with regard to an Eved Ivri who is a Kohen? Can he give him a non-Jewish maidservant? So the Gemara explains what are the two sides. Chiddushin, the fact that Eved Ivri is allowed to marry Shifcha Kananis. That's a novelty. Once you have a novelty, Loshna Kohanim, Loshna Yisrael. Makes no difference who it is, as long as he's an Eved Ivri, he marries a Shifcha Kananis. Dilma, the Gemara says, perhaps no. Shani Kohanim are different. While Hayil V'riba Behem Hakasav Mitzvos Yaseros. The pasuk we know when it comes to the marriage of a Kohen, they have much more limitations, and therefore it's possible that they can't marry Shifcha Kananis. Rav Amar Mutter, Shmuel Amar Asl. Rav says it's permissible. Shmuel says it is forbidden. Amar Le Rav Nachman Le Rav Anan. Rav Nachman told Rav Anan, Ki avisu bar Shmuel. When you were bar Shmuel, be'is kumadri itilalisu. What were you doing? Says Rashi, you were playing with paspasin. You were playing around. I think it's some type of food. Rashi says it's mirailish. In other words, he was saying to him, if you look at the Laze Rashi says, it's chatichos eitz ketanim. You were playing around. In other words, he was saying to him, you weren't paying good attention. My time, why didn't you prove whether or not a Kohen could become a Kohen, an Eved Ivri Nirtza from the following. The Chachamim say, Ein Eved Ivri Kohen Nirtza b'pnei shenasa b'almum. Now hold on. Tomar, you should have just, why don't you just say, Vim Tomar Ein Rab, again. The Chachamim said, he can't become a Nirtza because he'll have a mum. Now, if you're debating whether or not he can have a Shifcha Kananis, then that will precede that discussion. Why? If you're telling me that the master cannot assign him a Shifcha Kananis, then typically ahavti es adoni es ishti ves banai. Part of the declaration that's made by the Eved Ivri, if he wants to stay, is ahavti es adoni, I love my master, es ishti, my wife, es shifcha kananis, ves banai, and my children. If you can't get a shifcha kananis, he can't complete the sentence. The Gemara says veleka. And if a Kohen can't have a shifcha kananis, he can't say that. The Gemara says su lo midi. Nothing else needs to be said. This is, as we say, it's a bomb kasha. In other words, you can't even debate this anymore because this is so clear. You're just missing the criteria to become an Eved Ivri Nirtza. Ibayluhu. Gemara asks the following question: Kohen mahu b'yafas toar. Once we're on this discussion, can a Kohen who's fighting in the war go ahead and marry a yafas toar? What's a yafas toar? Yafas toar is a woman who was captured during battle. And ultimately, the soldier he has a very strong desire to marry this woman. So the Torah tells us that since we understand the conditions are very, very tough out there, he won't be able to control his Yetzer Hara. Because he won't be able to control his Yetzer Hara, the pasuk tells us that after a particular process, a specific process, he's allowed to take her home, convert her, and marry her if he wants to. What's the halach of the soldier as a Kohen? Could he marry a Yafas Tar? Gemara says Kiddush. What would be? Why do we say yes? It's a Kiddush. It's a Kiddush. It's a novelty that any Jew can go ahead and just pick up a non-Jewish girl at war and marry her. So I would say, if that's the case, Loshna Kohen, Loshna Yisrael makes a difference if he's a Kohen Yisrael. Oh, Dilma, maybe I would say Shani Kohenim Hayel V'riba Mitzvahs Yaseros. Marriage for Kohanim is much more intense. You have to be much more careful. So Rav Amar Mutter, Shmuel Amar Aser. Rav says yes, a Kohen can marry a Yafas Toar, and Shmuel says no. Now the Gemara explains. But Bia Rishona, when it comes to the first marital relation between this soldier and the Yafas Toar, Tikuli Amalo Pligi the Shari. Everybody agrees that the first act of intimacy is going to be permissible. Why? What's the logic? Why does the Torah allow anybody to marry this non-Jewish girl? Because the Torah recognized that the Yetzer Hara is going to be so strong in this case that he won't be able to fight it off. Now, I've got news for you. Kohanim also have a Yetzer Hara, and therefore the logic would apply to a Kohen as much as it would apply to a Yisrael. The question is when it comes to the second Bia. Rav Amar Mutter, Shmuel says it's Mutter, they're already married. Shmuel Amar Aser, Shmuel says it's not, it's going to be prohibited. Rav Amar Mutter, why does Shmuel say it's okay? It became permissible, so therefore it's permissible. Shmuel says, Aser, it's forbidden. Why? After this process, she becomes a Giores. Giores l'kohen lo chazia. A Kohen is not allowed to marry a convert, and therefore, says the Gemara, the logic won't work out. Yes, he converts her, but he can't be married to a Gyaris, and therefore the second interaction would be prohibited. Amar Ikid Amri, others say, everybody agrees. There's no argument. Everybody agrees when it comes to the second physical interaction, it's going to be prohibited. The Havile Gyaris, she's a Gyaris, and a Kohen can't be married to a Gyaris. Ki pligi, when are they arguing maybe a Rishana? When it comes to the first physical interaction. Rav Amar Mutter, Rav says it can be permissible. Why? The lo dibra Torah like an Yitzhar hara. The permissibility of marrying Yifas Torah is because we recognize the Yitzhar hara is too strong, and the Kohen is a Yitzhar hara. We'd rather the Kohen have this interaction with her in a permissible way than in a forbidden way. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel says, Asr, it's going to be prohibited, was kohecha de karinebe lahavesa el toch beisecha. The only time a person is allowed to have this first act of intimacy with her is if it's possible to bring her into your house. So, vavesa toch beisecha karinebe, Verisa bashivya, so kohecha de lo karinebe vavesa toch beisecha, lo karinebe verisa bashivya. You can't. The whole parsha, the whole idea, only is relevant if you could finish it off. If you can't finish it off, then you can't start it. We're just going to do a little bit more to get to the two dots because it's finishing in the same Gemara. Tan Rabbana, verisa bashivya. The pasuk tells us he'll see her in her captivity. B'shas shviya. At the time that she is captured, so she's already more calm. Eishes, vafilu eishes, even if she's married. Yifas Torah, the pasuk says Yifas Torah, lo dibra Torah like an Yitzhar hara. The pasuk was just speaking in a way to fight off the Yitzhar hara, which is muta shiyochel Yisrael basar temusos shchutos, top of Chaf Amar Aleph, val yochel basar temusos nevelos. Temusos are animals that are very sick. So generally the halach is we don't shecht an animal that's very sick because of the various possibilities of the animal being non-kosher. But it's better for a person to eat basar temusos, which is going to be slaughtered properly, than to wait for it to become into a nevela and then eat that meat as nevela. So the same thing over here. It's better for this person to have this interaction with her through a permissible fashion than to wait and have the person violate the mitzvah in the Torah. The chashakta, he will desire her. Afal pisha eina noah, even if she's not very nice. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. Ultimately, even if she's not objectively a beautiful woman, but if he has a desire for her, ba v'lo ba bechaverta. It's her, but you can't take her and her friend. V'lakachta, you will take her likuchin yeshlach. Rashi tells us that means that there's actually real Kiddushin, real marriage. Ba lecha. Lekuchin yesh lechaba. There is lekuchin in her. He'll marry her with Kiddushin. Lecha, when the pasuk says lekachta lecha, you'll take her for yourself. Leisha, lechal isha v'shlo yikach shtei nashim achas lo v'achas liaviv. You can't say, hey, let me grab one for my father. Achas lebno. You know what? I got one for myself. May as well take one for my son too. Take one to go. Doesn't work that way. It's only this one. It's this girl for him, and that's it. He has to first bring her home. It can't be on the battlefield. He has to first take her home, and after all that, there's a process of what he goes through. Ultimately, we hope that during that process he'll change his mind, but he has to wait until the process is complete. Ladies and gentlemen, have a wonderful day.
So lots of honey and tea. Are you giving a shiur tomorrow morning?
I believe so. Let me just turn this off. I think turn the recording off.
So lots of honey and tea today.
Yeah.